Welcome to our second session of Ask Inclusion Ed. I'm Keely Harper-Hill, and today we're going to look at using the evidence to support students to independently transition between tasks. And again, we'd love for you to post questions or feedback in the comment section below the Inclusion Ed practice that we're exploring. So please feel free to do this, and there's a direct link to the practice in the comments below. I'm coming to Inclusion Ed because I'd like to find out about how I can support students to independently move between tasks. At the moment, I'm constantly having to prompt a number of students in my class to move from one part of a task or one entire task to the next. So let's have a look. Here's a project called Structured Teaching. I'm going to read more about this. This will take me to the evidence base. And within Inclusion Ed, we can see that the summary is about the project, and it's evaluating the effectiveness of two elements: visual schedules and work systems. Okay, that sounds fairly interesting. And here we have the research aim. It's really important that you look at the aim so that you can see exactly what it is that the project was, the purpose of the project, what it was trying to do. So here, many of our projects are large projects, our 3-year projects. So they'll often go across several different phases, and they may have slightly different aims in each phase. So here it's phase 1, to refine a structured teaching program. Okay, so this is about developing a program, a teacher program. Okay, phase 2 investigated the effect of using these two strategies, visual schedules and work systems, and how it helped students stay on task. And what did they mean by on task? They had writing and typing. Oh, that's good, because my students find it really difficult when I'm wanting them to independently write and stay on task. And specifically, they looked at touching the paper. Specifically, the student pressed a key on a keyboard. And when you're evaluating evidence, a term like on task is really loose. And so you're really wanting to know, well, what did these researchers mean specifically? How did they define on task? And that's an example of how they defined on task. Okay, and so they looked at that particular behaviour and productivity, but they were also looking at the independence of students on the autism spectrum. Okay, and then in the final phase, they wanted to find out feedback from mainstream primary school teachers on the utility of visual schedules and work systems. Okay, well, let's have a look at this. So I can go here and have a look generally at what structured teaching is. Key elements. Now, this tells me a little bit more about structured teaching itself. And this project was about visual schedules. So it's going to give me more information about that, and more information about work systems. And I can see here that it's about providing visual and physical cues to sequence up the top here for visual schedules, sequence predictable events, and helps teachers to give students notice of anticipated changes and encourage independent transition. So that's really interesting, and that's really applicable to what I'm talking about, or what I'm interested in. There's additional information. There's a quick reference guide. I'm going to go into check the evidence base and have a look at what happened in phase 1. So they had a teacher workbook, and they used a single case study methodology. So it's pretty small scale. So I need to know this, but what did they were really looking at this thing called social validity. Did the teacher and the students think that using structured teaching was helpful? Okay, and also investigated something called fidelity. Could the teacher use structured teaching in their classroom? So this was really about, was it usable? Did it have utility? And the first one there, social validity, did they find it helpful? So as a teacher coming to a strategy or a practice, that's going to be really important, because of course, while you have the evidence around a strategy or a practice that is based in research, there is also the element that comes with evidence-based teaching that is around your professional judgment. So knowing that other teachers have perhaps found this a useful strategy or an applicable practice is going to be useful for that professional judgment. So if I pop down here, I know it's small scale, but what did the project team find? Well, the teacher in this particular case study needed more information than was given in the original workbook. So the student reported that the timetable was of some help and the work system that was implemented was very helpful. Teacher reported that the timetables were easy to use and the work systems helped keep many students on task, and that developing task checklists as part of this thing called the work systems, using that as a whole of class, so to suit all students in their class, did take some time. Okay, so that's really useful to know. So based on what this teacher reported and the student reported, the team adapted the teacher workbook and then moved into phase 2. The aim of phase 2 was to again look at on-task behaviours and productivity when the teacher was using the adapted workbook. So here we've got each teacher received an amended teacher workbook. And again, there are a number of multiple baseline single case experimental designs in 4 mainstream classrooms. So again, small numbers in these single case experimental designs case studies, but what's important to understand is that multiple baseline single case designs take at least 5 baseline. So that's before you try anything. So how is this student performing on task for 5 of those 5 opportunities prior to the implementation of the strategies that the teacher's using or the practices. So that gives us gives researchers greater confidence in being able to identify whether or not it is the use of the practice which then affects the student's behaviour, and then they can stop the practice, I beg your pardon, and then have a look at the behaviour when the practice isn't in place, and then implement it. And so that's one thing to bear in mind with this. The other powerful thing about single case studies done in this way is that often, and you would all know this, when we're researching with kids with autism, they can be extremely different. And so trying to get them into a group based purely and only on their diagnosis really gives you quite a mixed bag of abilities and strengths. And so this is much more around looking at each student in isolation and looking at their individual responses as you implement or withdraw that the practice. It tells us down here also something about fidelity. So this is going to be quite an interesting thing to work out. So where was phase 2 of the project conducted? We can see there it was in 4 classrooms in regional Australia. And what did the team find? And down here I can see the increase in on-task behaviours was statistically significant. And we can see an example here. And what is this showing me? So really and truly what you're getting in this section is the sort of information that is often communicated in the research literature, but what we're hoping here is that this is being done in a way which is much more accessible for teachers who are busy and you know, accessing this sort of information slightly more on the run, if you like. So it needs to be shorter, but still have the information that you may well be looking for. At the conclusion of phase 2, the team had sufficient evidence to believe that this was a practice which could very well be useful and effective in mainstream classrooms. And so they then went ahead to continue with an iterative design of the teacher resources that would actually support teachers to use the visual schedules and work systems with fidelity. So for those teachers who are coming to this and thinking, oh, I use visual schedules and they're all right, but they're not a panacea, that's a fair enough comment. But what's important to realise and to understand is whether or not you're using them with fidelity. And this particularly relates to the whole the fidelity of visual schedules, because often teachers will tell us that they have a visual schedule and they've used them. But if we drill down into how they're using them, and that's what this research showed, there are some key elements that are perhaps missing. And that's what we talk about when we mean fidelity. Is this intervention being used as it was intended to be? So phase 3 was all about applying a design, an iterative design-based process, which really focused on making the teacher resources to have the highest level of utility and to be the most supportive and to be the most socially valid for teachers. Were teachers going to look at the practices and at the manual and say, or the resources, and say, yes, this is very useful and something that I'm, in my professional judgment, think would be worth going forward with. And so phase 3, the aim was to obtain feedback from mainstream primary school teachers on the utility of visual schedules and work systems. And if we go down here, we find more information, for example, that teachers in New South Wales, Victoria and Western Australia participated in this element. And that what did they find? So their responses to the amended program were overwhelmingly positive. Reading the amended program increased teachers' confidence, but not necessarily their knowledge. Okay. And that in terms of the teachers who trialled this, they had a level of success and would continue using the strategies. And they were able to talk about how they could use this in their everyday practice. Okay, so what we have now is an evidence base that tells us that a strategy that was is considered an evidence-based practice for students with autism, so this is visual schedules, that has utility in mainstream classrooms, because previously most of the research has been conducted around or in specialist settings and not necessarily directly in mainstream classrooms by mainstream teachers as part of their everyday teaching. So this is giving us a bit of information about, so that evidence-based practice as part of the translation or mobilisation of that practice, this team have developed a program that supports teachers in their ability to apply both of those practices. There are a couple of features of inclusionED that will support you to communicate information about these practices with your colleagues or school leadership. And that is the quick reference guide as the first one. It just is a sheet that really allows you to explain to others what the purpose of structured teaching is. Some research projects have a bar that is entitled Check Your Fidelity, and this is really determined about by the purpose of the project. So in regards to this project, the structured teaching project, we have included a definition of what fidelity is and explained why then the project team developed checklists. And the checklists are to support mainstream classroom teachers to implement visual schedules and work systems with fidelity. So let's have a look here. And this gives you a checklist for these. So having looked at that evidence base, what I can see is fundamentally this was a research project that looked at trying to use an evidence-based practice in mainstream classrooms when the original evidence base for that practice, structured teaching, which in this case we focused on, or the team focused on, visual schedules and work systems to see whether they had utility in Australian classrooms and whether or not the teachers really considered those to be a valid practice to use. So opening up visual schedules, underneath plan, let's have a look, and we've got some resources here. We've got examples of resources of how they're used in real classrooms and information. So really to support you, to give you every piece of information that will help you. And here we've got some extra transition supports. And in fact, if we go down, this particular person in our community of practice has identified that traffic light transition cues were very successful, or they liked that idea, and that was something that they would be able to pick up. Last week we went through setting goals and reflecting and refining. Today I'm going to go into the apply the practice, and we can see here that this takes you through some steps, looking at how do you introduce the idea of visual schedules to students, remembering that we're trying to develop this as a whole of class strategy, where all students are aware that using visual schedules in some form or another is actually a really positive strategy for them to use. And then we've got some prompts that we've got a reminder here about using the visual schedule during your class time, because that really is one of the key things. Reminding students to check their schedules if you're wanting it to become part of students' ability to then independently access that to transition between tasks. Thank you for watching the second session of Ask Inclusion Ed. Just a reminder, post any questions or feedback in the comment section on the inclusionED practice, and there's a link to this below the screen. And we look forward and hope that you'll join us to our next Ask inclusionED session. Thank you.